Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. We are so excited to have you here for Brivia's April 2023 webinar. My name is Steve Smith, and I'm Brivia's Vice President of Market Development. Some of you may be new to Brivia or may be new to our webinar. So let me just give you a quick little overview of Brivia. At Brivia, we want to make work better. And one of the ways that we do that is we offer solutions that help improve an organization's leadership, culture, and engagement. We also provide these webinars free of charge. We've been doing so since December 2020 because we have a couple goals for you. This is really dedicated to leaders, to those that want to make a difference. And we want you as leaders to learn something new, maybe to try something new, and to improve your overall leadership and your organization's culture at the same time. Another way we add value to the folks that follow Brivia is through our monthly newsletter. You can see that on the screen right now. If you have not had a chance to register for that yet, you can take a picture of the QR code right now or click on the link that I'm going to put in the chat here shortly as well. All right, and thank you to those of you who've already subscribed. For today, we're going to talk about culture. And if you're like me, you got many stories you can share on culture. You got some great ones, right? Some of those ones that just kind of make you smile anytime you think about it. You have some so-so ones that kind of made a difference, kind of didn't. And you have some negative ones that may be even still hard to talk about. I know it is for me in some of the negative culture situations I've been in as well. So today you're going to hear Brivia's unique perspective on culture and how to improve it within your organization. For today's webinar, we got you here for 45 minutes. And please, let's keep this as interactive as possible. I see already some people know the drill they're putting in where they're joining us from today. We're going to do that right away in the chat, but throughout the presentation, please use the chat button, use the Q&A, and now I'm going to give you a chance to do that. So let us know where you're joining us from. Another thing that we'd like to hear about from you today as well, we're going to add one more question. So my favorite US president, you can kind of see him back here over my left shoulder, is Harry S. Truman. And he has a quote that I love. He said, "Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers." So not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. So why don't you let us know in the chat, what's the best book you've read in the last 12 months? What's had the most impact on your career in leadership in the last 12 months? So for me, I'm joining from my office in Airdrie, Alberta, which is just north of Calgary. And the book that's had the most impact on me and my leadership is a book called Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. Just hold that up here for you. I get no royalties, by the way, if you choose to grab that book, but go ahead and put that in there into the chat here for us. So Chris, why don't you turn on your video? Today's speaker is Chris Downey. He is Brivia's Vice President of Operations. He's one of Brivia's co-founders. He's an overall thought leader on the topic of culture. So Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you, but before I do so, let us know where you're joining us from and the best book you've read in the last 12 months.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Am I coming through? Is my video coming through?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, awesome. I can't see myself for some reason, but that's okay. I don't need to look at myself. I see myself in the mirror every morning. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for joining us, everyone. It's great to see we are well represented here from all over North America, it seems. So we've got all time zones joining us. And I love that you're sharing these books, just as Steve did his. Consider that unpaid advertisement, but it's great for leaders to share what has influenced them. And hopefully there's some good ideas here for you. But I'm here today. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar. And the topic today is workplace culture. Now, workplace culture is something that has gotten a lot of attention for the last, 20 plus years. There has been numerous books written on it. There has been thousands of articles written on workplace culture, and all for good reason. All for good reason. Culture is very, very important. We're going to talk about that. But my hope here for you here today is I want us to look at this idea of workplace culture and really how we define ours. I want to look at it through a little bit of a different lens. So my hope for you in our time together here today is that maybe there's a takeaway where you'll be able to go back to your workplace and be able to look at your culture and just maybe through a bit of a different lens and a few things that you might be able to do to help increase the overall health of your workplace culture. So that's what I'm hoping for in our time together here. So let's dive into it. First, before we get too far into it, let's just talk about this idea of workplace culture. What is it? What do I mean when we say workplace culture? Well, culture, the simplest definition that I have come across to describe uh, culture, to describe someone's culture, is it's how things get done around here. So culture is how things actually get done. Not what we say we are, but what we actually do through our behaviors, through our actions, or sometimes inactions. That's what it's our personality as an organization. And our culture forms through it's the social norms, right? The ways of being, our the things that make us us, that have either arisen organically or intentionally over time, right? Again, it's our personality. And the reason why is culture so important? Well, it matters because the moment human beings come together, culture starts to form. Right? So the moment we're actually starting to create our own microculture today here with those of you that are joining us here today. We're setting some norms. Who speaks and when? When do we answer questions? How do we answer questions? These are all artifacts of the culture that we're creating right now. So the moment you have humans coming together, culture starts to form. And the reason this is so important and it doesn't go away, the reason it's so important as it relates to work is, well, work are human beings coming together in some form to work towards some common goal. So just by virtue of that, the culture exists. So that is happening whether you realize it or not. And it influences our behavior. It's very powerful and can have a significant influence on our behavior. So we're gonna talk more about that. But just know that culture is always there. And even within our organizations, we have our organizational culture, and then there's even small cultures within those teams, within working groups. And all of those things influence how we behave. So what I'd like you to do, I want to start here with a reflection. If you're familiar with our webinars, it's not uncommon for us to do this. And I want you to think of a time in your life. Now, this could be at work. It's great if it's at work, but it doesn't have to be. It could be outside of work. I want you to think about a time when you were part of a group or a team where you just knew you fit in. Or maybe you might even say you felt that you belonged. Now, this doesn't have to be work. It could be work, but it could maybe be part of your church. It could be part of maybe a team that you were on, a sports team or a volunteer organization. But I want you to connect with a time where you just knew, you just felt that you fit. Now, what I would like you to put in the chat here are what were some of the things that contributed to you knowing that you fit in, that you just felt that you fit in? What were some of the things that were happening that just made you feel like you belonged? Let's see in the chat, what were some of the things in that environment where you just did? Synchronization, thank you. Welcoming, friendly, you felt heard. You're able to show up authentically as yourself, heard. This is amazing. There were shared goals, a feeling of accomplishment. Okay, you're kept up to date. Joy, Darcy. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? You were missed if absent. Okay, so you were seen. Awesome. Thank you for this. This is great because I'm going to come back to this. And Karen, there was laughter. Isn't that great? Let me ask this: when you were part of that environment, that culture where you knew you fit, where you knew you belonged, what difference did that make for you? How was that helpful to be being part of that culture? And I see Jolene put in confident to show up authentically. I'm assuming that's it. You felt whole. Thank you. It was energizing. You felt safe. It energized me, Karen. Thank you. You felt comfortable. Okay, you felt valued. Okay, this is amazing. Right? So in this environment where you knew you fit, you knew you belonged, something very important was happening. So I want you to hold on to that. We're going to come back to that. But I think you're already starting to move into something. We know that culture has power. Culture is powerful. And I'm going to use this example to articulate just how powerful culture can be. And I need to give our partner, Steve DeGroot, credit on this because he was the first one to use this analogy for me a number of years ago. So I want to make sure he gets credit for this. But however you define this individual in your life, I want you to think about grandma's house. Okay, so what doesn't actually have to be your grandmother. It could be an elder in your community, just somebody that you know that you kind of view that had an influence on you. But we'll just use the term grandma's house. When you went into grandma's house, did you even need to question how you were going to behave? Or did you just know how you were going to behave when you went in there? Right? Did you have to question, or did you just know how to behave? You just knew, Kathy. Thank you. Actually, I think it was Steve Smith said, we were having this conversation yesterday, and he just said, you smelt it at grandma's. The culture was present. This is it. You just knew what that is. That's culture. You knew what language to use. You might have known, how to behave. And I'll tell you, at my grandma's house, I knew what fork to use at which course of the meal. I also knew where my napkin was supposed to go. It was supposed to be on my lap. See, that's culture, and it's powerful, and it can influence our behavior. Language I might use outside of grandma's house shifted the moment I entered grandma's space. Now, whether or not things at your grandmother's house were healthy or unhealthy, it's not where I'm not here to judge that. But what I want to articulate is there was incredible power to that. Now, workplace cultures, we'll go back into the workplace cultures, but just like societal cultures, can both be healthy and unhealthy, right? They can both be healthy and healthy. So I want you to think of this visual as a continuum. Okay, think about this as a continuum, because just like us as humans, we could always be more unhealthy. That we can certainly go down that way, or we can actually, you can never be too healthy, can you? You can always get a little bit better. So think about this as a continuum that's kind of ongoing here. But cultures can be both healthy and unhealthy. And when they're healthy, they have an influence on how we behave, just as when they're unhealthy, they can influence how we behave. That's the power they can have. So one of the things I want you to think about, I don't want you to spend too much time, I don't want to take you to a negative, but have you ever found yourself in an environment where you behaved in ways that ultimately you just didn't feel good about? Right? There were influencers around that brought that out. Right? And I see Donna's comment here that healthy equals productivity, without question, for sure. But I want you to just connect this idea that healthy and unhealthy, there's both. Now, this is the thing. Culture, especially our workplace culture, requires both intention and attention. As I mentioned, our culture is our social norms or ways of being that either arise organically or intentionally over time. Our workplace culture is too valuable to leave just to chance. Now, a healthy workplace culture does something very, very important for the people that make it up. And in fact, if you go back to that reflection that you had thinking about that, it sounds like for you that was a healthy environment. And what was happening in that environment for you? And again, for those of you that have been on, I recognize a lot of the names, you know about what I'm sharing with you here. That culture was creating what we refer to as the three great states. The three great states, of course, are safe, significant, and situated. Now, this comes from the core algorithm, which is the work of Steve DeGroot, who I'm seeing some shout outs here. We do love Steve, don't we? And I'm bringing this up just as I did last month because these three great states are so important to our success. So if I go back to some of the words that I saw in the chat around what difference did feeling like you belong, that you fit in make? You had shared goals. There was clarity, right? You felt like you belonged. You felt like you mattered. I think someone said you were missed when you were gone. You felt significant, right? You felt connected. See, this is it as humans, when we're clear, when we know what we're here to do, when we feel that we matter, that we're connected, what that creates for us is a sense of comfort, safety. Safety was actually used there. So healthy cultures create the conditions for people to be at their best. And someone mentioned that healthy equals productivity, productivity equals, well, there's quite a link there, but for sure, absolutely, a healthy workplace culture will lead to a more productive workplace culture. So there are lots of things that contribute to creating those three great states. And as you mentioned, I asked what were the things that contributed to that healthy environment you're in. So there was many, but there are two key elements that all healthy cultures have. Two key elements that all healthy cultures have. Now, and I'm talking about organizational cultures. I'm also talking about societal cultures as well here. Two key things that all healthy cultures have: common language and values that are known and understood. So values that are known and understood, what's important to us, and a common language. So bringing this into the workplace, when I say common language at work, I am not talking about French or English or Cree or Ojibwe. I'm talking about how we engage in conflict when it arises, how decisions are made, how we communicate together. That's the language I'm talking about within organizations. And values are what's important to us as an organization. Now, all cultures that are healthy are connected with these things. If we think outside of our workplace right now, think about in society, there are some cultures in our society that are struggling. And many of those cultures are struggling. Why? Because they've been disconnected from values that are important, and their language has been taken. And the pathway back to health is to reconnect with those values and reclaim that language. See, for us in organizations, we need to know what's important to us, and we need to have a shared language in how we interact with each other. It's so pivotal. Now, the idea of values, one of the things I want to highlight, we actually work with organizations to help them, we call it setting the compass, getting really clear around what's important to you. When we look at the compass as your vision, your mission, your values, and your strategy, and you use that to guide the work that you do. So if you need any help getting clear on your values, we have a process to help you with that. We also work very closely with organizations on creating that common language through our core communication approach. So happy to talk to you about that if you're interested. But these are two key elements that all healthy cultures have in common. Now, here's the question though: what ultimately defines your culture, right? Our values and common language are necessary elements of a healthy culture. But what defines your culture? That's what I want us to think about now. Let's dig in on this. What defines your culture? Well, I'm going to break this down into two things. Your culture is defined by the people that make it up and the systems in which they operate. So the people that make up your culture, how they behave, and the systems in which they operate. Those two things ultimately define your culture. Now, there's lots of components within that, but these are two things I want us to think about. I'm going to come back to this visual in a few minutes. So people and systems, that defines your culture. Now, I want to ask you this question. What do you value? Really? Now, this isn't about what do you as an individual value. I want you to think about, what does your organization value? Not what you say you value, not what you say is important. So remember, culture is the ways of being, it's the behaviors, it's how things get done. And how things get done says a lot more about your culture and what values are actually present than what you state your values to be. So I'm going to ask you a question. So when we think about how do we determine what we're truly valuing, or what are we reinforcing, maybe is a better word, how would we actually define the culture that we have today? Instead of asking, hey, what's important to us? Ask yourself this question. What am I prepared to tolerate? What am I prepared to tolerate? Because what you allow to happen within your organization, or as a leader within a team for that matter, says a lot more about the culture than what we state our culture to be. What are we allowing to occur? Now, this is important. I want you to think about, we're going to take this idea deeper now. This is the pivot from how we often look at culture. What are you prepared to tolerate? What are you prepared to put up with? What are you prepared to accept? One of the things, if you've taken any of our courses or programs, or probably even within our webinars, we've shared this with you. That which we permit, we promote. This idea that when there are people behaving in unpreferred ways, I'm just going to say, I'm going to actually ask you a question in a few minutes about workplace behaviors that are impediments to a healthy culture. So keep that in mind. But when we allow behaviors to continue without, and we permit them, we don't deal with them, we're effectively promoting them. Right? So we might say that we have a highly accountable culture, but yet more often than not, people don't follow through on their commitments. Are we really living a value like that, or is our culture one of low accountability, even though we're saying it's of high accountability? Do we permit that to go on? Do we tolerate that performance? So let's go back to this visual. As I mentioned, what defines your culture are the people that make it up and the systems in which they operate. So here's a question. I put behaviors under people. What are some of the behaviors that for you might struggle with within your organization that might be indicators of an unhealthy culture, or a culture that is sliding towards that scale? What are some behaviors that you see? Okay, William, thank you. Gossip. What else, folks? Nepotism. Okay, yeah, keep it going. What else? Absenteeism, constant negativity, passive aggressive negativity, lack of consistency, value product over people. Okay, so these are awesome. Thank you for sharing that. There's lots. Keep them coming. So this is important. When we are struggling with issues in our culture, I want to be really clear about my idea around what are you prepared to tolerate? Because that question has been asked before. Chris didn't invent that question. But oftentimes when we are seeing issues, maybe it's with a lack of empathy towards others, or a lack of accountability, thank you for this, or minimum effort. It's very easy for us to look at the individual and blame the individual and make it a people problem specifically. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a challenge there, that if someone isn't performing well, I'm not suggesting we don't have to deal with it. But if we just leave it there, that behavior is going to return eventually. So I'm not suggesting we don't deal with the issues at a people level, but if we stop there, then we're not tending to the culture in the way we need to do. What we need to do, and this is the shift, is we need to look to the systems in which we're operating to determine why would someone, presumably we've hired somebody with skills that have interest in doing the work, that are qualified for the job. Why would someone that comes in that's interested, that's qualified for doing the job that we invited into this organization, be behaving in this way? What is happening systemically that is leading someone to behave in this way? And that's what we need to start to address. So when I ask you the question, what are you prepared to tolerate? We need to look beyond the behaviors of our people. And again, I want to be clear, we do need to deal with those, but we want to look to the systems that are contributing to that behavior. Because if we go back to earlier in the talk here, when I talked about the power of culture. So if you overlay healthy and unhealthy against these things, you can have a person that is themselves, even the best people at times in an unhealthy environment will behave in ways that don't really make sense with the individual, but it makes sense in the environment. So if we're just limiting it to people, we're missing the point. We need to go into the systems and ask ourselves, what are we prepared to tolerate within our systems? Thank you, by the way, for all of this, the comments in the chat. I appreciate, I see some questions are coming in, so keep those coming. So let's just dig in this idea a little bit deeper. When I say systems, What do I mean? Systems, it's not one system, it's a collection of systems. And what I put up here, we look at how we hire, our onboarding processes, our performance management processes. We like to call it performance development, but many of you are probably used to seeing as performance management, your rewards and recognition, retention, offboarding. What I have up here, just for conversation today, these are all parts of the employee life cycle. But there's more systems than this. Of course, you would know that. There's your operation systems, right? There's how you set goals. There is countless systems. But your systems, you see, influence the behavior of the people that are operating within them. And that ultimately defines your culture. So we need, again, to look beyond the people issues and look at the systemic issues, right? We want to address the people issues, but we want to address it with curiosity so we can figure out what's happening systemically. One of the things I'll even say, one of the things I saw in here was nepotism is a sign of an unhealthy culture. Absolutely, for sure. What would be happening systemically that would actually lead to that even happening, right? So all of these things. I was doing a workshop not that long ago, and we were talking about this idea of tending to those systems that are creating it. And somebody brought this up to me. They said, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And I'm just going to go back here. What am I supposed to do when my employee is lying to me? So I asked a couple of questions. I said, okay, first of all, this is in a larger group setting, so I needed to be mindful here. I didn't want to call this person out. But I said, so do we know for certain, let's be curious, are they lying for sure? Do you know conclusively they're lying? Yes, they're lying. Okay, so we know for certain they're lying. I would then ask you, what is happening in your organization that an employee feels the need to tell a lie? It was really interesting in that moment. They kind of sat back and went, okay. And I don't mean to blame, but the reality is most people don't show up to work to be dishonest. They don't show up to work to not perform well. It could be, but it's a very small slice. There's likely something else that's going on that's leading to this. So as I mentioned, our systems, these are just employee life cycle systems, but I'll pull one out here in just a moment we'll use to describe. But our systems, we talk about our systems, right? This is the role that systems need to play within our organization, whatever they are. Our operating system, like I said, our HR systems, our corporate systems, enter anyone. They need to provide support for the people or the processes in which they're there for, right? So support needs to be there. It ensures clarity around what's important. And it creates safety. Just as an example, it can reduce accidents from happening if we want to go with the physical safety. But also your system needs to preserve psychological safety or emotional safety. See, ultimately, a well-designed system that humans touch in some way, shape, or form needs to promote and support the three great states. But unfortunately, often we create systems that compromise those three great states. So let's think about that now. Think about your systems now. Do they create do they contribute to the three great states, or do they compromise them? Do they contribute to the three great states, or do they compromise them? So let me go back to our systems and think about, let's go to performance management. Okay, I'm going to make up a fictional situation here, but let's say it's an organization that claims to put employees first, and employee wellness is number one for us, and we value growth. Okay, and that's and I will actually say, at an individual level, I believe that to be true. Does the performance management system that's operating within that, does that create the three great states, or does it compromise the three great states? I will say this: if the performance system, this is it, if it compromises the three great states, the challenge with that is Now we're on shakier ground. Now we're starting to slip to unhealthy, and that can yield to non-preferred behaviors, right? So I want us to think about this. I'll think about some traditional performance management systems here. What is a step that often happens when someone's performance goes down? Well, in many organizations, they get put on a PIP, or performance improvement plan, or performance management plan, right? Well, think about that. The performance improvement plans that you've seen, maybe you've actually been part of as a leader or even as an employee, do they create the 3 great states, or do they compromise the 3 great states? Right? See, the processes that we're reinforcing, that's telling a lot about what we as a collective organization actually value versus what we say. So there's a very easy test here when you think about your systems. Take these 3 great states and overlap them on top of whatever the system is. Does the system create or contribute to the 3 great states, pardon me, or do they compromise the 3 great states? And if they compromise them, it needs some work. We want to address this. Now, I'm talking small systems and large systems. So in fact, Steve's going to be sharing with you a handout where basically a checklist where you can look at some of your systems. And it is just this simple, at least to start with. Overlay this over top of the system and connect with the fact. See, what happens, I want to be very important, something important I need to say here around what do we actually value. Sometimes I know people, might value growth. They might not be aware that the system is doing harm. Okay, so I don't want to judge that right now. But once we become aware that that system is doing harm, continuing to promote that, that's saying more about our culture and what we really value as a collective in this. And I'm sure for many of you, that's actually led to probably some internal tension when you're needing to perhaps carry out a PIP when you know it's actually doing harm. So we need to look beyond the behavior to look to the system, because it's those systems that's going to really define the culture that we have. Now, I'll get to questions in just a minute. I want to leave time for questions here because I know there's a lot of them. But I want to talk about the role of leader, because I recognize so many of the names here. And again, thank you for joining us. I know some of you are leaders that are working within a system that you can't necessarily change. And that system might not provide what we ultimately needed to do. That is a reality for many. So I realize that not everyone has the ability to change the system. But I want us to think about it, whether you're an HR professional, you're a frontline leader, right? You're an executive. I view you all as leaders. And as leaders, we need to work both in the system or systems and on the systems to ensure our organizational health or culture is healthy and strong. So if we are system owners, and again, like I said, even small system owners, take a look at your systems. Are they enhancing the 3 great states, or are they compromising them? And even small changes to those systems can make a very significant difference. So you want to work on your systems. But as I mentioned, many of you are leaders that are working within a system that isn't necessarily providing what it needs to provide. What we can do as leaders is recognize, call it the weak points within the system. Let's use the performance example. Someone's performance dips. They go on a performance improvement plan. We know that performance improvement plan can compromise those 3 great states. What can we do as leaders to ensure that we keep performance up at a higher level where we don't have to get into the performance improvement plan? Or if it does happen, because it does happen, what are some things we can do to create some safety for the employee in that system? We want to think about that. So you want to work as a leader within the system to create those 3 great states, right? Find the weak points and do what you can to the extent possible to ensure people have that experience. But if you are a system owner, remember, if you're tolerating a system that is perpetually, say, doing damage or harming, we really need to take a look at it. Okay. So here's a couple key takeaways. There's a lot going on here, but this is a few takeaways. I'm ready for questions. I know, Steve, you're at the ready here. A few key takeaways I want you to think about. Pay attention to your culture. It's there. It's happening with or without your knowledge. It is present and it is influencing the way that people behave. So this is not something that we want to just every now and again come back to. It is present every day. As I mentioned, right now, we are experiencing culture. It is present. So pay attention to it. Know who you are as an organization. Set your compass. If you don't have a compass set, this is important. As a leader, you might work for an organization that doesn't have values that are identified. Look around. You are seeing values present that are revealing themselves in those interactions. You can get a gauge as to where things are. But if you can set your compass, and you can even do this within your teams, by the way. Address issues quickly. So when I say issues, anything within your culture that is leaning towards unhealthy, let's address it. But there's a caveat to that. Approach it with curiosity. Don't approach it with judgment. Approach it with curiosity. And be curious what might be happening to contribute to someone behaving in this way. Again, I'm not suggesting we just let people off the hook for behaving poorly. We want to manage that. But there's a system that's leading into that. So address issues quickly, curiosity. Work in and on your systems. For sure, I see Darcy's comment there about understanding behavior. Yes, as Darcy knows, I know many of you know this, all behavior makes sense once we understand the meaning behind it. Work in your systems and on your systems, both, right? The systems you can change, work on them. The systems you can't, work within them, acknowledge those realities, and what can you do, even given some of those deficiencies, to create the 3 great states. And remember the 3 great states at all times. It is so important. I know that the individuals that are here want good things for the people that you're responsible for. I don't doubt that. But sometimes our individual intentions, but the collective culture that we create together, that bar drops a little bit. And if we tolerate whatever we're prepared to tolerate, is actually that's where the definition of our culture starts, as opposed to what we aspire to be. So let's close that gap between what we tolerate and what we want, and elevate it. So with that, I've seen a lot of conversation. Any questions, any comments? There's been a ton of comments for sure, but I'd love to hear any questions. Steve.
Yeah, Chris, we got a couple of questions here that came in, and folks, you still got time. Use the Q&A, use the chat button for any questions you have. One came in, Chris, do we need to be healthy with ourselves first before we can invite and then participate with healthy culture in the workplace?
Yeah, interesting. So do we need to be healthy ourselves first before we can? So absolutely, that's ideal. We want to be able to go in the best possible shape possible, the best shape possible, for sure. So tend to your needs, absolutely, and don't. And this is one of the things we often say to leaders is needs don't go away until they're met to some degree. And there's a natural tendency for leaders and parents to push their needs back. And if we push them back too far, they will come out, but unfortunately come out in not the best areas. So do tend to what's important to you. But one of the things that's important about thinking about workplace culture, we might be struggling with certain things outside of work. That's real. And we're not always going to be healthy. I'm saying healthy holistically. But what we can do is contribute to an environment at work that creates those 3 great states. And the reason I say that is so when we do have a healthy workplace culture, and you are struggling with something outside of work, when you go into work, that workplace actually becomes a bit of a cocoon of safety and actually helps you. Doesn't necessarily change your experience outside of work, but at least when you come to work, you can be there and know that you matter. You can have clarity and even feel safe. And then you can leave maybe at the end of the day in a little bit better shape. That's the opportunity that's in front of us. So ideally, we're going in healthy, but let's be honest, we're humans. There are times when we're not. We might be struggling with a loss, but that reinforces the importance of creating those 3 great states at work. Last thing we want to do is have work making life worse. At very least, it shouldn't be contributing to more life problems. That's the bare minimum. We do it well, we might actually be able to make it a little bit better. Great question.
Awesome. Chris, do you mind going back to the system slide? Someone's just asked to see that again. And folks, I'm just going to put something in the chat here. You can download our handout on systems checklist just by clicking on this link. And Chris, while we're here, we actually had a question come in about systems. So
Sure.
can a systems approach be misunderstood by management and create a dehumanizing or mechanistic culture?
Some big words in there.
Yeah, I know. I probably butchered that word.
But... No. Yes. Let's not forget that many of our systems have been developed. They came into. All of the ones that are up here are primarily, HR related systems, part of the employee life cycle. They were developed in many cases in parallel with the Industrial Revolution. Right? They were developed alongside our manufacturing processes, inputs, outputs. So in many cases, we create systems to, let's just say, I've been using the performance management system as an example, to treat people like they're absolutes. But we're not as humans. Let's just use an example of someone being late. Steve being late and Chris being late. While on the surface, they're the same things, they're different things that are driving it. So unfortunately, our systems, whether they've been dehumanized, I don't know if they ever have been humanized because they were developed at a different time. What we need to do is rethink the systems and introduce humanity into them, introduce curiosity as opposed to removing judgment. So I absolutely agree with that statement. They can be misinterpreted. And I want to be clear about this. For those individuals that are even misinterpreting them, they're not doing it with intention. They're not intentionally harming people. What we need to do is bring to their awareness the impact these systems are having. Because one of the things we've talked a lot about, both Steve and I, we have yet to meet a leader that when we ask the question, what do you want for your people? Not one, after 11,000 has said, I want to screw them up. I want to do them harm. Yet some leaders are doing this, just so we know this. So if the leaders are responsible for a system that is doing harm, we need to bring it to their awareness and then work together. But absolutely agree with that statement for sure. We need to
Great. Awesome. Chris, do you want to pull up the slide about the 3 great states? Someone's just asking, can you talk a little bit more about situated and maybe give another example or two about what situated looks like?
Yeah, so situated is about being like, what's the point? What's the purpose? Right? So when we say what's the purpose, we don't mean what's our purpose on earth. We're talking about what are we here to do today? What is the task? What's in front of us? Right? We have incredible clarity on what we are there to do. So when people have clarity on what they're there to do, and they're there, then you link it to significant, they're doing something meaningful, then we tend to do well. One of the examples I've heard before is when we're in a flood situation and someone that values community, values family, right? It matters to them, it's significant, but the clarity is, yeah, we're putting sandbags down here. And why? Because we're safe. The clarity is we're putting sandbags to stop the river from overflowing. Why are we doing it? Because we're protecting our community. See how that works? And then what's interesting about that, someone comes along and says to Steve, who's sandbagging, who's already slipped 2 discs, said, hey, Steve, want to take a break? Steve's like, absolutely not. Because Steve's clear and he's connected with something that's very important. Never seen you sandbag, Steve, but I was just assuming that you would do it. But yeah, situated is about providing clarity in that moment, in that situation, in that task. Ask yourself that question when you're a little bit lost on something. Am I situated? What am I here to do? Reconnect with that.
Okay, great. Okay, Chris, another question came in. I'm new to a large organization that has a very large population of long-term employees tied to systems and behaviors that have not been challenged from a work culture perspective. My initial thought is to start with my team and the systems I have influence over. What approach would you suggest?
Well, that's actually what I would start with. I would start with, what can we influence? So just kind of think about these as building circles. Focus on the systems in which you're responsible for, but and also the people that you are responsible for within the system. Remember, in the system and on the system. So focus on the systems you're responsible for, but you're also responsible for those people in your team. And start to create that experience. And that will start to build. We see this in organizations, sometimes in government, systemically on a large scale. Maybe there's a lot of dysfunction, but you see some highly functional teams as a result of this. So I agree with that. Start in the things you can influence and control. Acknowledge those things that you can't, but with those things that you can't control, what can we do to change the experience internally? Right approach. Continue doing what you're doing.
Okay, perfect. It's 10:45, folks. I know we said we keep you here till 10:45, but Chris, we got a couple more questions. So I think I'd like to answer these live if we can. Okay. And for those of you who have to drop off, you'll be getting a link to the webinar recording as well as the handout. So another one that came in, Chris, is how can we combat ableism in workplace culture? We all know it's there, but nobody wants to address it in recruitment and selection.
So can you repeat the question again?
It's combat ableism in the workplace, like specifically, I think with folks that may have ability challenges and unable to participate fully in the recruitment selection process, specifically within an organization. Okay,
and the question is, we know that there's challenges with that.
Yeah, and how can we combat that?
Like, what are some ways? Yeah. Okay, so if there's challenges within our recruitment system, and what again, it goes back to, what do we value? So this is it. People are aware of it, but we're not doing anything. We have to ask that question. What's important to us? Because if making sure we're accessible is, and we are not, then we need to ask the question, what does it say about us if we don't look at that? What we need to do is build up some commitment to be able to do something about that. And so it would start by asking the question, how does continue with the recruitment system that operates in this way, how does that align with this value that we claim is important to us? And if the answer is it doesn't, okay, what can we do about it? And we need to start having conversations. And honestly, look to resources that you can bring in to help you with that. But it needs to become a priority, not just something that we talk about. Great question.
Okay, Chris, one other question. If we look at our systems and overlay the 3 great states, and then I identify inconsistencies inherent in the old and outdated systems, where do you start to influence positive change in systems and culture?
Yeah. Okay, so it's two things. This goes back to what we've been talking about. If you have influence on those that are responsible for those systems, share your observations, bring it to their attention. But also, don't just dump it on them, offer to help. Ask the question, how can I help with this? That's if you can influence it outwardly. What you can do is change the experience people are having within that system. What are some small changes you can make, even in a performance system, to change how people are experiencing feedback, how they're experiencing even going into a PIP? So I would, if you have the voice, if you have the ear of others, share it, but offer to help. Be part of the solution. If you don't, focus on changing the experience. What happens there, you create positivity within a group. And it doesn't take long before people come along and say, hey, what's happening over in Jennifer's area here? Because this is very different. You know, absenteeism is down, this is down. People will start. So influence what you can influence, control what you can control, and that will contribute to a better environment, a bigger picture.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris. Chris, if you want to go to the last slide in the presentation here, and while you're doing that, great job, Chris. As usual, you knocked it out of the park. You nailed it. You gave us lots of good stuff to think about. And folks, I just wanted to let you know there's going to be a follow-up in your inbox in the next 24 hours. It's going to have a link to both the webinar as well as the handout that we put in the chat a couple times as well. Want to let you know too, we're going to continue the conversation on culture in May. So make sure you join us for our May webinar. We'll get that invite out to you next week as well. Just on the screen here, there's lots of different ways to engage with Brivia, and one of the ways is through our YouTube channel. So if you want to subscribe and see all our videos on YouTube, you can do that now by taking a picture of the QR code with your phone or clicking on the link in the chat. Chris mentions a couple of our programs, Core Compass, Core Communications. Check those out on our website. Get in touch with us. We'd love to continue the conversation. And finally, I just want to say thank you for joining us here today. You've given us one of your most precious resources today, which is your time, and we thank you for that. And we're here for you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care.